What's up, 714 youth? I'm so excited about this week because I know it's just going to be great. I don't know what all you're doing, but it's going to be awesome. So, there you go. Alright, so you know it's Wednesday. It's time for our video devotional. Alright, we're going to be out of Galatians again, and I'm going to read from Galatians chapter 2, verse 20 and 21. Alright, and this is Paul writing in Galatians, so that's important to know because we've talked about his encounter that he had with God. We've talked about just that special revelation of God and how he had decided to live that out, to turn his life around, change his life for Christ, and to let God use him in crazy ways. Alright, so chapter 2, verse 20 says, I have been crucified, I, being Paul, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life that I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing. Okay, so what he's saying here is he's saying that, I have decided to just die to myself and to live for Christ, to just dedicate my life to the work of God. And he's saying, I know that I have that because of what God did for me, what Jesus did for me on the cross. He gave himself for me because he loved me, and I don't have to set aside that gift and still abide by the law. We've talked about the law that people in the Old Testament followed, and we've talked about how crazy it was and how strict, and there were so many regulations and sacrifices and all this kind of stuff. And so when Paul was saying this, he was talking to people who still thought maybe in their mind that they still had to live by that law. And he's saying, listen, because Jesus died on the cross, you don't have to live under that burden of the law anymore. Because if you do, you're rejecting the gift that God gave you. You're rejecting that grace from Christ. But if you do continue to live out, because some people, the Jews, were still continuing to live under the law, and he's saying, because you're doing that, you're forsaking that grace, you're forsaking that gift. And if that was really the case, if we really had to live by the law, Christ died for nothing. There was no reason for him to die if we still had to live under the law. If we're supposed to follow the law, going to the cross would have been pointless because he did that to free us from that burden. Alright, I'm going to read from Galatians chapter 3, verse 23. And this is Paul saying, before this faith came, we were held prisoners by the law, locked up until faith should be revealed. So the law was put in charge to lead us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. Now that faith has come, we are no longer under the supervision of the law. He's saying, again, the law was good. It served its purpose of bringing us to Christ, of bringing us up to the time of Christ even. It's led us this far, but now there's a change. Jesus came to earth. Jesus died on a cross for the salvation of man. By the grace of God, we are saved. Now we are done with the law. It's brought us up to this point, but we are no longer under the supervision of the law. And we don't really feel that same pressure to abide by the Old Testament law because we've never had to. But these are people who their whole life they've been told, you have to do this, you have to follow this law, you have to obey the law of Moses. And now, whoa, things are different. I don't have to anymore. It would be crazy to think that way because it'd be completely different than they've ever been told. But we don't really feel that pressure because most of us haven't grown up. I know that if we were of the Jewish faith, we still would kind of be familiar with this, but some of the law we probably wouldn't never know was part of the law because it's just so vast. But we have, in a way, as Christians, formed our own sort of law that we might feel pressure and burdened under. We have come up with lists of do's and don'ts, and yes, of course, the Bible tells us there are things we're not supposed to do. But I think that as Christians, we've come up with a whole different list of things that we can and cannot do. And that might be different for each person, but it's just the way that as we have taken on religion, we have kind of made up our own law saying that if you do this, you're a sinner. But if you do this, oh, that's okay. That's justified. That's okay to do that. You know, we've made up lists of requirements, spiritual requirements, and also we have even created levels of achievement in our faith, which is totally not how it's supposed to be. You know, God is the one that we seek after, and God is the one who will elevate us and will continue to grow in our lives. We don't have to worry about getting a badge saying, oh, I've completed this, I've been saved, I've been baptized, I've been filled with the Holy Spirit, I've kind of stepped up those levels of achievements. But that's not at all as it is. You know what? Whenever you've been saved, baptized, filled with the Holy Spirit, you are still, or should be still, seeking God just as fervently as right when you were saved. Nothing changes. You don't step up a level. You don't get a badge. None of that. Those are things that we have created in our minds, and it can be a burden. It can be a pressure saying, well, I have to meet this requirement. I have to make this next step. We have to follow God. We have to love God and do what He's commanded us to do. That's what we have to do. You know, we can follow those rules, that law that we've set up for ourselves all we want, but that's not going to save us, and it's not going to save anybody else. It's only going to bring a burden on us to fulfill things rather than the joy of our salvation that we have received. Again, Galatians 5:4 says, you who are trying to be justified by law have been alienated from Christ. You've fallen away from grace. By trying to live up to a law, by trying, for those people back then in that time when Paul was talking to them, for them to live according to the law was actually separating themselves from God. Actually separating themselves from God's grace that He'd given. The same thing is true with us. Whenever we try and abide by the Christian law that we've created, the Christian level of achievements that we have set up, we're separating ourselves from God. We're rejecting His grace and trying to fulfill it in our own power. And it's actually separating ourselves from God. We need to come back to grace. We need to come back to Christ and realize that is where it begins, and that's where we stay. You know, it's not just where it begins. It's not just, yes, He gave us grace for salvation by the sacrifice He made, but that's where we always should stay. Our minds should always know, no matter how long we've been saved, it's still by grace that we were saved, and it's still the cross that saves us. So I want you to be encouraged by that this week. Remember, don't live up to others' expectations of you. Don't live up to what you think religion is about. Love God, love people, and His grace will be poured out even more in your life, and you'll see it. It's going to change you. All right, I'll talk to you soon.